Mob of the Dead is one of the most revered and celebrated zombies maps of the classic era, widely considered to be one of the best maps of all time, and following the release of Zombies Chronicles for Black Ops 3, there was a giant influx of people who wanted to see the map remastered on a modern COD engine. Treyarch saw the love people had for Mob, and decided to revisit Alcatraz at the launch of Black Ops 4 with Blood of the Dead. However, other than the location, it was by no means the same map. This didn't really scratch the itch for people who wanted to see the original experience recaptured, so with mod tools being available for Black Ops 3, it was down to the community to get this map made. With Call of the Dead already under my belt, I was confident that I could do it justice. This is the story of how I remastered Mob of the Dead. Now, I actually had no real intention of doing a full remaster of Mob in the beginning. I started working on the map in August 2023 just to practice lighting techniques while I worked primarily on my original project. Initially, I was just planning on recreating the spawn room and leaving it at that. However, upon completing it, I had the urge to just keep going. I expanded it to the main cell block area and cafeteria, and by the end of the month, I had mapped out the entire prison block. At this point, I was pretty satisfied with what I'd done. I still wasn't planning on doing the whole map, and for the time being, I was pretty happy with it. It was only meant to be practice, after all. I shelved the map and went back to working on my original project, while also doing some scripting work for Hives' survival maps. I created the perk drop system for his bridge map, which was a lot of fun. The way that it works was that every few rounds, the Mob of the Dead plane would spawn in and drop a random perk for the player, similar to Nuketown Zombies. It took me a few weeks to finish, and every time I went to launch my test map to work on it, I scrolled past my Mob of the Dead project, just calling me to finish it.
Finish it! Finish it!
It was only a matter of time before I launched it back up again, and decided to just keep working on it. Remastering Mob of the Dead had been attempted before by a few other teams, but it had never really been finished. The most notable version being the one by Shifty Gamer, which was created just a few years after the mod tools had launched. Now, I wanted to just mention this version of the map quickly because this was one of the first times the community had attempted to remaster a map independent of Treyarch, and was one of the projects that inspired me to remaster Call of the Dead originally. But anyway, I was now back to working on it, and from this point forward, this project had my full attention. I started by blocking out the entire map with fundamental shapes at first, which was a different approach than what I took with Call of the Dead. We never did a block out on Call of the Dead. We simply worked on each area one at a time using the geo for reference. Whereas this time around, I blocked out the entire layout of the map first, so I could start scripting it and getting doors and window locations set up straight away. Visuals and details I decided to leave till last this time around, as it gives more time to test and find bugs while I just work on making the map pretty. And the first feature I made for the map was actually the gondola. This was a fairly simple little script. It's just an invisible platform that moves up and down when you press a trigger, with clips on either side to stop you from falling out. Everything else about it is purely cosmetic. I chose to do the gondola first because it made getting around the map when playtesting much easier. Mob had a lot of running back and forth for its main quest, and the gondola is an absolute godsend for it. Next up, I worked on the 3 traps of the map, being the acid trap, fan trap, and tower trap. These were pretty much the only map features that I could work on before the afterlife system was implemented. The acid and fan trap were kept largely the same, however I buffed the tower trap, because in the original map, it barely does anything. I made it do a bit more damage, and I also buffed the fire rate. I also spent some time on some of the map's smaller details around this time too, such as the perk machines phasing in and out, and things like ciphers and the little comic strips that you find around the map. Mob of the Dead has a lot of small things like this that really add to the atmosphere of the map, and I wanted to get them out of the way now so I didn't forget about them later while focusing on more important details. Now, a lot of the map's main features were actually put together very quickly. The afterlife system was obviously one that needed to be done very early on, because many of the other map's features heavily rely on it. Afterlife is basically the backbone of Mob of the Dead. It was ported by Dobby for another project that he's working on, and he very kindly allowed me to use it in this map as well. There were a few compatibility issues when he first sent it to me, such as the jump height being different, meaning the player couldn't actually reach the portals, but this wasn't too much of an issue to fix, and now that Afterlife was implemented, it was really starting to take shape. I cannot stress how quickly this map started to come together. From starting the project until this point, it had only been around 2 months, and the map was already playable, had the afterlife system, and I was now ready to work on the main quest. In comparison, Call of the Dead wasn't playable until about 9 months into development. I was absolutely flying out of the gate, and although we still had a long way to go, things were looking really promising. December rolled around, and one day I was sat on Twitter just scrolling when a video appeared on my For You page that piqued my interest. Someone else was working on Mob of the Dead at the same time, and they had already ported over the Blundergat, Mystery Box, and were working on the Hell's Retriever. And after a little back and forth on Twitter, we decided to combine our projects and start working together as a team. Meet Chens, an absolute key player in the Mob of the Dead project. I would still be working on this map now if it wasn't for meeting him at the right time. And working as a duo, we're like a perfect match. Our skill sets fit together perfectly. Anything that I wasn't so proficient at, he could do really well, and vice versa.
Like Sean mentioned earlier, I was also trying to make my own version of the map, just seeing what I could do with it. Really though, it really didn't make it much further than a block out. Mostly because Radiant and my laptop did not get along well. Yeah. But while the map was stuck in limbo, I decided to start working on some of the weapons, like the Blundergat and Hell's Retriever. I got the models and animations ported from Black Ops 4. Unlike the Blundergat though, the Retriever still uses the Black Ops 2 animations. That's the stuff you saw earlier. Oh, and by the way, I'm Chens. I ended up working on the third-person character models for the remaster, along for the animations for a couple of the weapons, and even put together the artwork you see in-game, being this one. All in all, I'm pretty happy how everything turned out. And honestly, it's been great being part of this.
With Chens now on board, things were going incredibly smoothly, and in the meantime while he was porting over the weapons, I was working on refining some of the map's areas. I did a few passes when it came to actually detailing this map. I went around the entire map and just did some basic texturing and model placement, and then later on down the line I would go back and refine it again and again, and I'd just keep iterating it until it looks like how it does today. For much of the development, the looks of this map was constantly changing, as you can see in a few of these old screenshots. After the first visual pass, it was now time to work on the main quest. Now, Mob of the Dead is unique where the main quest is actually tied to the Pack-a-Punch quest. In fact, to do the main quest, you just do the Pack-a-Punch quest 3 times and that's it. But out of any COD Zombies map, this is probably the most convoluted way to access the Pack-a-Punch. If you're watching this video, I imagine you've already played the map before, so I'm not going to run through every single step. Instead, I'll just highlight some of the more notable parts. Luckily for me, Black Ops 3 already has like full scripts for setting up craftables, so when it came to the plane, all I had to do was register the parts and place them where they need to be. And then the parts that I scripted myself were the puzzles that you needed to complete in order to access the plane parts. The first one I worked on was the laundry machine, which was probably the easiest to script other than, well, this one where you just open the cabinet. I thought about changing the lockdown step for the laundry machine because it is quite easy. In multiplayer it spawns a Brutus, which is fine, but I was thinking about maybe doing that in single player as well, because honestly if you do this in an early round it's an absolute cakewalk. I also thought about doing super sprinters during this step, but I decided against it. With how tight this location was anyway, I just don't know if it would have worked. In the end, I just did it the same as it was in the original. Another notable step that was a bit tricky to get right was the elevator step in the mineshaft, where you have to enter a certain code that can only be seen in Afterlife. Getting these Nixie tubes to work properly was a real pain. Sometimes the code it would give me would just not work. There's a little sequence that happens after you input the correct code where all the numbers cycle around, and that would sometimes just not work. Or the code would be accepted and the elevator just wouldn't fall. Getting this to work properly was just a lot of trial and error, and was by no means the cleanest script I've ever done. But in the end I got it to work, and I've not really had any issues with it since. While I'm talking about it, there's also a few secret codes that you can input into this machine. If you input the code 935, it plays Where Are We Going from the Mob of the Dead trailer. And if you input 115, it plays a Brutus voice line. Although these Easter eggs are pretty niche, I made sure to include them in my version as well. The other plane part puzzles were pretty straightforward, and once they were complete, it was time to work on the takeoff sequence. The plane sequence was a bit of a struggle to get right. I actually had to redo it a few times. I started off with just getting the pure functionality for it down, attaching the player to the plane and then sending the plane off into the sky. The plane actually teleports mid-journey, which you might not notice because of the fog. In the original map, the bridge was actually underneath Alcatraz, and so you would get teleported down into this new area. They did this just for performance reasons, as it was on the old Xbox 360. Whereas in my version, the bridge that's in the distance is the actual bridge that you get sent to. The reason I didn't do it the same way as they did in the original is purely because I think it's cool to be able to see your friends on the bridge if you remain at the prison, which you can't do in the original. The bridge itself was actually provided by Hybes from his bridge survival map. I remade the support beams that go down the middle of the bridge, and I reworked the lighting a little bit, but other than that, it remains mostly unchanged from his original version. Now, to get back to the prison, you need to zap yourself with these electric chairs that spawn in at the far side of the bridge. This sequence was much easier to implement than the plane sequence, as there's not as much going on. It just consists of locking the player's camera and then forcing them into afterlife as they teleport to the spawn room. Without any visual effects, it looks a bit silly, but functionally now, the entire gameplay loop of the map was finished, and you could run through it from start to finish as many times as you want. It was a little bit rough around the edges, but it was working. And with Chens having finished the wonder weapons, it was now time to implement them, and this is when the map really started to take shape. After implementing the Blundergat, this map really started to feel like Mob of the Dead. The only things really left to implement were the Acid Gat upgrade, the Hell's Retriever and Redeemer, the Golden Spork, and oh yeah, him. The baseline for Brutus was provided by GCP and has been used in quite a lot of different custom maps, including Hybes' bridge map, which I talked about earlier. I had to modify him a little bit in order to allow him to lock down map features such as the mystery box and the traps, and also adding functionality for him to spawn on the bridge periodically. He was a bit of a pain to get right, to be honest. Many players thought he was far too easy at times, while others thought he was far too difficult. And when it comes to boss enemies in games, it's really difficult to strike that balance between challenging and tedious. This was the same issue I had with balancing George on Call of the Dead. There were a lot of complaints after the fact that he was too challenging or too difficult, while as other people who enjoyed the challenge thought he was too easy. And this is something I think I need to improve at in future projects. The Hell's Retriever was also implemented around the same time as Brutus. The weapons themselves were ported by Chens, and I just finished off the script for them while I worked primarily on the two quests needed to obtain them, the Cerberus Soul Boxes and the Hell's Redeemer upgrade. The dogs were actually pretty easy to implement, as Der Eisendrache has very similar features, and so I could use the dragon heads as reference for the dogs. The most difficult part of this process was actually just lining up the animations. So when the zombie is killed, he flies towards the dog and actually lands properly in the mouth. For much of the development, this animation didn't really line up too well, and it took a lot of tinkering in order to get the zombie to align properly in the dog's mouth. The upgrades quest was also incredibly straightforward. This is a very linear quest, meaning there's only one specific order that you can complete the steps in. So the script for this quest is essentially just a series of events that need to be fulfilled in order for the next step to be active. And I just want to talk a little bit about this quest because a lot of people don't seem to understand it. The consensus seems to be that once you have the Hell's Retriever, all you have to do is go to the bridge and get 30 kills without using a weapon, which is partially true, but there's much more to it. First of all, there's a prerequisite where you need to get 15 kills with the Hell's Retriever anywhere on the map. This trips a lot of people up because they'll go to the bridge and start getting kills with the Retriever, and they'll hear the noise thinking they've completed the step. But in reality, they haven't, and they've only done this first step that's required in order to activate the bridge step. Another thing that's needed is you need to be on at least round 10 before you do the bridge step, otherwise it just won't work. I had a lot of people reporting to me that the Hell's Redeemer upgrade was bugged because they couldn't get it to work on lower rounds. And so honestly, just to get rid of the headache, I removed this requirement in my version of the map. But if you're struggling with the Hell's Redeemer upgrade on the original, that's probably why. The melee weapons, being the Spoon and Spork, were incredibly straightforward. They're essentially just reskins of the default melee weapon, just with different damage values. They even use the same animations. I even made sure to include the Shiv as a replacement for the default BO3 knife. This is an incredibly subtle detail that I'm sure most people wouldn't have noticed, but I made sure to include it anyway. And with that, the only core feature left to implement was the Easter egg. I kept the Easter egg the exact same as the original this time around, after the confusion that was caused on Call Call of the Dead. The only difference is that in this version, you can complete the Easter egg solo. If you are to complete this Easter egg on solo, it will simply spawn in a bot for you to fight in the finale. With all of these features now implemented and the acid gap being finished by Chens, I started getting ready to open the map up for a public playtest, so people could help give me feedback on the map and also find bugs, so that when the map was to eventually go live, it would be in a much more polished state. I created the first trailer for the map in order to advertise this playtest, and on June 17th, 2024, the beta version of Mob of the Dead for Black Ops 3 went live. The playtest was an absolute success, and although there was some bugs here and there that needed ironing out, that was the point of the playtest. People were enjoying the map, and all that was left to do now was to focus on the visuals. Something that was suggested quite a lot was to do a custom HUD based on the one from Shadows of Evil. Community members over on the Discord actually made these mock-ups of what the HUD could look like, which I used as a baseline for the HUD you can see in game today. I also made a custom max ammo icon similar to the one they used to have on Shadows of Evil before it was removed. I overhauled the map's visual effects with the help of Raging, making new effects for pretty much every single aspect of the map. The plane parts, the lightning beaming down the bridge, the afterlife system, the key hanging off its pulley. No stone was left unturned when it came to this visual overhaul. And if you compare the map how it looked at the start of the playtest till the end, it is night and day. I was also still iterating the mapping throughout the entire playtest, all the way up until public release. And in the end, I was really happy with how it turned out. The final thing added to the map were remastered weapon models provided by Zeller that he made for the Die Rise remake that he did with Dobby. I'm incredibly grateful for everyone who helped out with this project along the way, as well as everyone over on the Discord who helped playtest it during this phase. I replaced the BO2 weapons with these new models along with some new animations made by Chens, and with this, the map was now finished. After a year and a half of work, it was finally time for this project to go public. Everything was set in stone and a date had been picked. December 5th, 2024. Absolutely nothing could get in the way of this release date. Oh, come on, man. It's like, you can't write it. About an hour after I had announced the release date of Mob of the Dead, Treyarch announced they would be releasing Citadel the exact same day. And so to stop my project from being overshadowed by Citadel, I decided to release the map a week early. November 29th, 2024, Mob of the Dead hit the Black Ops 3 workshop. A few weeks after the map released, I was looking through the prestige rewards on Black Ops 6 and I noticed something weird. The rewards you get for Prestige 6 are all Black Ops 2 themed, and the loading screen looked strikingly familiar. Now I know Treyarch obviously made the original Mob of the Dead, but is this my version? Now there's a few explanations for how this could have happened. The first being that they just went on Google and found some random image of Mob of the Dead and it happened to be mine. Another is that maybe some Treyarch employee knows about my map and snuck this in there as an Easter egg. Treyarch haven't mentioned this and they've made no effort to contact me, so I imagine it was just an accident, but there's no way to really know. And this is easily one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me. As far as I'm aware, this is the only time a custom map has ever been acknowledged in an official COD game. Whether it was intentional or not, thank you Treyarch for including it, because when I first saw this, I was elated. And thank you for watching this video. This video is a little longer than my last one, so if you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more. I was thinking of making some documentary style videos like this on other people's projects or other games, so let me know what you'd like to see next. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.